Hello everyone, I'm Megan Sullivan and welcome to my full review for the PlayStation 5 version of Achilles Legends Untold, developed and published by Darkpoint Games. If you like reviews of historical games, please subscribe to History in Games, it really helps me out. Thank you! So if you followed the History in Games YouTube channel already, you know I've been attempting to manifest the early access release of Titan Quest II, an isometric action RPG based on Greek and other ancient history and mythologies. Unfortunately, that didn't work, so I decided to check out Achilles Legends Untold, a game that looks very much like Titan Quest and plays very much like Diablo. In fact, if you've ever played a Diablo game, then the gameplay mechanics here are going to be very familiar to you. Like in Diablo, the player controls a single hero, in this case Achilles, the demigod who famously fought in the Trojan War, as attested by the 8th century Greek poet Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey. The plot of the game is very straightforward. Achilles fights at Troy and, spoiler alert, just like in the epic cycle, is killed by Prince Paris after Achilles famously fights his older brother Prince Hector. Instead of ending up in the gloomy underworld or eternal paradise, however, where Achilles ends up depends on which tradition you follow, the swift-footed warrior magically finds himself transported back to Greece where everyone is living in fiery ruins for some reason. In order to find out what the heck is going on, Achilles must first hack and slash and dodge and parry his way through both men and monsters, and then meet, and often fight, the former leaders of the Trojan expedition, who will give him exposition on how the world fell into terrible disrepair. This game's main campaign for most people will last 10 to 15 hours, and there is post-game content for those who want to continue Achilles' journey. Now, developer Darkpoint Games describes Achilles Legends Untold as a Souls-like experience, a reference to From Software's very popular and very challenging Soulsborne franchise. However, outside of retrieving enemy souls and being scale-based, there isn't a whole lot here that's very Souls-like. Everything from the gloomy aesthetics to the combat mechanics to the user interface is clearly inspired by Activision Blizzard's Diablo franchise. That's not a bad thing, by the way, but don't expect Achilles Legends Untold to reinvent the wheel here. Like in Diablo, the player can arm Achilles with a number of upgradable weapons, including swords, spears, two-handed swords, we'll talk about that, and axes. All of the base stats and attributes of these weapons, just like in Diablo, are based on rarity. Although unlike in Diablo, this is not a massive loot drop game. Weapons can usually only be found in treasure chests, taken from bosses, or bought from the game's only blacksmith. In fact, the blacksmith is the only merchant you deal with in the game because there are no towns. Only ruins everywhere Achilles looks. Now, typical of an isometric action game, Achilles can apply different types of elemental damage to his weapons, including dark, light, fire, poison, etc., as well as fling damage-inducing objects at the enemy like magic bombs and darts, which can be bought or crafted from enemy drops. He can also dodge and parry and run in battle, though these actions drain a stamina meter that only fills back up when Achilles stands still or walks at a normal pace. Strangely, Achilles cannot jump in this game or use a bow and arrow, a major weapon of war in the Bronze Age. And it should be noted that there are no classes in this game. Achilles is a warrior. He is not a mage and he is not a thief, which makes sense because Achilles is in fact the ultimate warrior of the Bronze Age. He can, however, get a little boost in battle by wearing special amulets, which come with both positive and negative effects, such as boosting Achilles' health but making him slightly weaker in battle. He can also trigger special skills, including magic circles that either heal him or increase his damage output. Heck, he can even kick an enemy out of his way 300 style. And finally, players can also help Achilles stay alive and well-rested by visiting special shrines, where they can spend skill points accumulated in battle to unlock more health, strength, and unique abilities for their one-man army. Did I mention this is a lot like Diablo? Because it is. And that's both good and definitely not so good. Now let me say straight off the bat that this is a pretty impressive showing for a small indie studio like Darkpoint Games. Achilles Legends Untold runs pretty well, with not too much frame rate dipping. The graphics are decent, the music isn't bad, and I enjoyed exploration. There's a sizable world map full of cellars and ruins to poke around in, which is fun, and I also appreciate that there are a ton of shrines scattered around the world, as these shrines not only replenish Achilles' health and allow him to access a beautifully presented skill tree in the shape of starry constellations, but he can also use these shrines to fast travel around the world map, which is very useful in the last hours of his adventure. I also, for the most part, enjoyed the combat. It's fairly fast-paced and easy to get the swing of, though I didn't get a Souls-like challenge from it. But then again, I played on story or easy mode, so that might be why. Although, I think even if I played on a harder difficulty setting, I would have done okay. And the reason is because thanks to the very skilled sound design team, you can actually hear dangerous enemies before you can see them, and enemies clearly telegraph moves that can either be blocked with a shield or require Achilles to dodge out of the way. Plus, Achilles has access to a nice mix of melee and ranged weapons that can help him on the road to victory. Although it is annoying how you have to pause the action if you want to switch weapons, as opposed to just being able to quickly cycle through his one-handed weapons. Now that's all well and good, but unfortunately there are some gameplay and story issues that kind of drag Achilles down. One of my biggest issues is the lock-on mechanic in combat. It's great when Achilles is fighting a single major baddie, but when he's dealing with a hard-hitting mob, it becomes a serious problem. Achilles will automatically lock on to a single random enemy nearby, which slows down his movements and exposes him to attacks from behind. You have to smash the right analog stick if you want to release him, and then cycle through multiple enemies if you're trying to get rid of a specific threat that's preventing you from effectively managing the mob. This feels incredibly frustrating at times. Another issue I had was the lack of enemy variety. Over and over and over again, Achilles fights the same wolves, skeletons, soldiers, spiders, and rays, which makes combat a pretty repetitive affair. Only the occasional boss fight against a chimera or a minotaur offered anything unique, and even then, I had to fight them like twice. Then there's the story, or rather, the lack of one. Despite drawing from a rich literary and oral tradition, the plot is very bare bones and is just way too slow to get to the point. Why is Achilles back from the dead? Why is he forced to fight his former comrades? It takes forever to find out because Achilles spends most of his time doing fetch quests instead of questioning his fellow warriors about the events taking place around him. And when he does finally get the chance to talk to his comrades, the exchange isn't very exciting. And that's because all the famous heroes you know from the Iliad, Agamemnon, Menelaus, Paris, Hector, are completely devoid of any personality. They're pretty generic, as is Achilles, who is portrayed as a model superhero who cares about the common man and is capable of great mercy, which made me lol. As we'll cover in my upcoming episode about the real Achilles, when this guy is in a bad mood, he is an absolute sociopath. Whether he's dragging Hector's body around the walls of Troy, straight up murdering a dude for teasing him, or decapitating a teenage boy who shunned his advances, he is far from the generically heroic Achilles we see in this particular game. And that's a good summation of Achilles Legends Untold. Overall, it's not a bad game by any means, but it feels more like generic fantasy than something specific to the Greek Bronze Age. In fact, there's a lot of anachronisms in this game. Legends Untold features Corinthian helmets, ships in the style of triremes, European-style wine cellars, shields featuring the Spartan lambda, Athenian drachma, the equivalent of a medieval Zweihander, and references to Greece as if it's a united country. None of these things existed in the Bronze Age. Meanwhile, Achilles lacks access to things that were prominent in the Bronze Age, like chariots, bows and arrows, and slings. But I think the thing that really made me side-eye the game is when enemies would spot Achilles and yell out to stop the infidel. Infidel? That is a very specific medieval term. In fact, it doesn't appear until the 15th century. What is it doing in a game about ancient Greek mythology? I mean, come on, Dark Point Games, you can do better than that. Now, I don't want to be too harsh on this action RPG. When I wasn't struggling with the lock-on mechanic or tapping my foot waiting for the story to get to the point, I was actually having fun. Though I did demur when it came to playing on a harder difficulty mode or checking out additional post-game content. It's just that it didn't have the rich mythology or history I was looking for. And there's a lot of it when it comes to Achilles, which is why I'm making a separate video about the real Achilles. We'll look at both his mythology according to ancient art and the epic cycle, a collection of poems recounting the entire narrative of the Trojan War, as well as his real-life Bronze Age counterpart, whose name appears in Linear B tablets and who might really have encountered the Trojans on the battlefield. But until then, let me know, have you played Achilles Legends Untold? What do you think of it? Thanks so much for supporting History and Games, everyone. See you later!